of Logbox, innovator in digital health, and an orthopedic surgeon, who will present on the use of the electronic portfolio of learning, or e-portfolio, and its use to strengthen undergraduate medical education. He has a keen interest in digital health with 10 years experience developing products for the South African market. Dr. Goldstein has developed digital solutions for various South African institutions, including the Colleges of Medicine of South Africa, and he'll talk more about that in his presentation. After completing his internship and community service in South Africa, Dr. Goldstein completed basic surgical training at St. Mary's Hospital in London and became a member of the Royal College of Surgeons. He returned to South Africa to undergo postgraduate orthopedic training and received the FCS orthopedic qualification with distinction in 2012. And of note is that he was a recipient of the J.M. Edelstein Gold Medal. So after working as a lower limb trauma consultant at Charlotte Maxeke Academic Hospital, Dr. Goldstein joined Professor Schippers and underwent a 2-year dedicated arthroplasty fellowship. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Goldstein, and I'll hand over to him to do the presentation in a short while. Just for those, if you have problems with the connection, etc., please post that in chat. For questions related to the presentation and the webinar, please post it in questions and answer in Q&A. We will batch all the Q&As together, and at the end of the presentation, we will allow a discussion time to host your questions. So the chat is merely for issues that you may encounter logging on or hearing, etc. Please use the Q&A function for questions pertaining to the e-portfolio discussion. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Dr. Goldstein.
Thank you, Professor Naidu, and colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. It's a great honor to be able to present to UKZN on the use of an e-portfolio for undergraduate training. And thank you for the kind introduction, Prof. Naidu. So I'm going to share my screen and just share a presentation. Very happy to take any questions or queries. As you said, we'll address all of them at the end of the session, or we might break in between the presentation, just to focus on specific areas. I'm going to start off with a quick PowerPoint presentation with some videos. Then I'll move on to a live demo of the system, and then include some of the new features that we've incorporated around workplace-based assessment. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, if I can just confirm that everybody sees the screen.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so once again, welcome everybody and good afternoon. Before I start, I need to just explain a little bit of the history behind Logbox. So essentially the story is as Prof. Naidu mentioned, I worked in the UK for about 5 years. And while I was there, I was exposed to the first electronic logbook system / portfolio system, which they had launched in the UK at the time, which I had to complete as part of my basic surgical training. I came back to South Africa, and essentially I was exposed to now having to complete a logbook and portfolio for the Colleges of Medicine, and it was all paper-based, very tedious, involved going back to theatre ledgers and having to trace back procedures that I'd done 3-4 years ago, and then trying to get rotation sign-off from supervisors. And I just really thought there would be an easier way to do this. And at that stage, I knew very little about technology, and I thought, well, let me just build an app. Little did I know how much work and effort it would be. And 10 years later, I've really gone on a significant journey. We started off, the first app was even before applications, even before iPhones existed. We wanted to do it on a BlackBerry, and the developers then dissuaded me from going on BlackBerry, and I'm very glad that they did. We started off with a smaller development company, and then a mid-sized development company. And then eventually in about 2015, the majority shareholding of Logbox was acquired by a company called EPUs. EPUs is actually a derivative of Pretoria University. They started about 35, 40 years ago. They were a spin-off from the technology department at Victoria University. But since then, they've been commercialized. And now they're a very large company. They've got 3,000 employees. They're in about 33 countries. And they deploy large software implementations all over the world, locally and abroad, mainly in the HR and payroll space. But they've very much moved out into developing bespoke software solutions in a whole variety of sectors. And Logbox is the first in the healthcare suite. They're in the process of acquiring a few other businesses. But the reason why I say this is that, just so people don't get the impression it's myself and two developers in my garage. There's a significant global company behind the product, the development. There's a team of engineers that do the product development. And this is some of the credibility of EPUs, which, as I said, is the partner, or our mothership, if you want to call it. They also do some very interesting social development stuff related to elephants, rhinos, and people. And 1% of the revenue is channeled into the ERP program through the EPU's companies. So what is basically developed is, throughout the last few years, we've developed 3 products on Logbox. One is the Logbox academic system, which I'll be running through today in detail. The other 2 products, just for your interest, one is called Logbox Patients, and essentially that avoids the frustration of patients having to fill out the same repetitive forms every single healthcare provider that they go to. So it's a defragmentation system, and it allows patients to own their demographic data and essentially share it with different healthcare professionals that they visit. And then we have a third product, which we call Logbox Practice, which essentially is a full electronic medical record, clinical database creation tool, incorporated into pre-admissions theatre lists, theatre scheduling, recording all your clinical notes digitally, and creating customized clinical databases. But today I'm going to focus on Logbox Academic. And to just give you a little bit of history, I approached the colleges of medicine with this idea of building out an electronic portfolio with them a good few years ago, probably spanning back almost 5-6 years. And we've got on the journey with the colleges of medicine of South Africa to essentially provide an electronic portfolio to the majority of specialties in South Africa. And now we're embarking on a very exciting new journey, which is they approached us because the way that postgraduate medical training is going to evolve is, instead of having a end of 4-year or end of 6-year, what they call Texas shootout, where you write this big massive final exam which determines your future. You actually have regular iterative workplace-based assessments that are done in the workplace on a regular basis, and actually give a more holistic view of the candidate, rather than one final exam that is you either pass or fail. And that would be a significant departure from the current way that postgraduates have been evaluated in South Africa. So we have a mobile application. The mobile application is predominantly aimed at capturing procedural information at this stage. We're about to include an assessment module into that, so that you could actually do your workplace-based assessments locally on the device. And the benefit of obviously having a mobile app is that we've got it on iOS and Android. It also has offline functionality. So if you're in the hospital and there's no reception, like down in the basement or in theatre, etc., you can record your procedures offline, and then they can sync with the web portal once you have connectivity. And obviously the benefit is that it's mobile, it's portable, and it's quite intuitive to use. There's also a web portal currently for Logbox Academic. It's focused very much now on medical officers and registrars. And we are in discussions with the HDCSA about extending it to interns. We don't have any firm feedback on that yet. But the system is a platform. In other words, we can adapt it to portfolios for other environments. And in particular, we could definitely do it for undergraduate training. So the website is there. You can go and browse through. It's www.logbox.co.za/academic. And then this is some of the benefits. Obviously, it can integrate with an academic institution. So it can be reporting and statistics and dashboards that can be offered to the organization or the academic institution. It allows you to track, almost like a LinkedIn profile, your training history throughout from start to finish. So if you do any specific courses, or you attend a meeting or a congress, or you write a paper, or you do anything, you can record all of that on this training history page, which I'll show you just now. And then the other feature is the ability to sign off rotations electronically. So it's very important that the person who's mentoring you or your supervisor, etc., can see the work that you've done within a particular rotation and would be able to assess you and provide feedback, which is two-way. So obviously the trainee can submit something, the supervisor can then submit their own answers, and there's two-way communication. We've handled all of the POPI data-related issues, and the system's got very good security. It's hosted with AWS at the moment, and that allows you to use the system as what we call software as a service. So in other words, it's a cloud-based solution, but also with offline capabilities. You can create reports that you can export to Excel or PDF. You can also upload particular related to procedure photos if you want to keep a record or something interesting that you've seen while you've been in clinical practice. And as I said, there's online, offline access, and we also offer 1 gig of free cloud-based storage, which is quite adequate for what you need for the log. The next concept is something that we're also going to be introducing very soon, is the concept of digital identity management. Here we did the slide for the CMSA, but essentially this is a separate module that we could apply to any of our systems. And the benefit of this is, how do you prove the identity of the person who's actually submitting the assessment? And there will be a facial recognition and an identity verification module that will be able to say, well, this is the actual trainee and this is the actual supervisor who's signing off online. Because you always have to make sure that that is the actual person who submitted the assessment. So I've got a quick overview video. This was prepared for the Colleges of Medicine. PPS was a sponsor for this particular project. And I'm going to start that now, and then we'll go from there.
For healthcare professionals, the process of capturing logbook and portfolio information is a tedious and time-consuming task. Paper-based methods are inefficient. Creating reports becomes unmanageable. Why not streamline your portfolio development with Logbox Academic, a web and mobile-based application that allows healthcare professionals to share information easily and securely? Integrating directly with academic institutions, Logbox Academic allows trainees to record and develop their portfolio progress before submitting it for digital rotation sign-off, creating real-time interaction between trainees and supervisors. A portfolio of evidence is a requirement to enter certain examinations with the CMSA. Ideally, log your electronic portfolio from the start of your training. Our template-based approach caters for multidisciplinary customization, with customizable forms that create a solid platform for workplace-based assessments. A dedicated mobile application allows you to capture your procedure information offline and sync when you have connectivity. How does it work? A trainee can sign up at any stage and start recording their logbook and portfolio information. With identification verified, HODs are preloaded into Logbox Academic by the relevant training institution. Healthcare professionals can sign up on the system and request supervisor access rights from the HOD. Once the supervisor has been verified, they will be able to sign off on trainee activities. Our home screen offers a quick overview of your portfolio. You can upload a copy of an existing logbook and review your latest procedures. Quickly and easily create logbook procedures on web or mobile while updating your training history as you progress in your career. At the end of a rotation, create a sign-off request and select your supervisor. Any attachments uploaded via logbook can be viewed in the attachment screen. Visit www.logbox.co.za/academic for more information. Logbox, your medical life simplified.
So just to run through, in our next slide is the concept of a software development lifecycle. And some people in the audience might be familiar with this, but essentially, how do we actually create software? How do we get it from an idea in your head into something that's live and productive and that people will actually use? So the first phase is what we call planning and analysis. So this is where we sit down with the clients and we actually gather all the requirements, and we do what's called the business analysis phase. And from that comes two specific documents: a business requirements specification and a functional spec. And what that does is it allows you to kind of like understand what are the requirements up front. Now, in this situation, for example, with UKZN, because we have an existing functioning system, we would rather do something which is called a gap analysis. The gap analysis is very important because what you want to understand is what do we have in the current platform versus what is envisioned for UKZN, what are the specific requirements, what is the content that needs to go into there. And the gap analysis, the analysis and design is very important to do up front. You never want to start building a house before you've architected the solution and you know what you're in for. Otherwise, you start building one room, having to knock it down and then build another room on top of it. The next concept is what we call design, and there we create design specifications. In other words, how will it look? And that consists of two or three aspects. One is called a functional design or architectural solution, where we actually map out architecturally, and that's more of a technical solution. And then we can create low fidelity wireframes, and those wireframes are essentially a architectural plan of how the screens work, look, feel, etc. In this case, we would use the existing screens and just create the additional screens or content, etc. that would be required. And then we can create what's called high fidelity wireframes, which is with all the graphic design bits and how it will look from a front end perspective. Then the developers start coding, and they code through the solution, and we avoid using what's called a waterfall approach. The traditional waterfall approach in software methodology was that you would define everything up front. You would create a big Gantt chart with a project schedule, and you'd start at the beginning, get to the end, and after 6 months or after a year, you'd deliver it to the client, and the client would say, well, that's not what we asked for. So we rather work in what's called an agile methodology or Scrum methodology, and there you work in 2-week cycles, or 2-week sprints. You once you've got your spec, you create the code. You let the client then review it on what we call a development platform or a QA platform, and then they give feedback, and then you start the next sprint, but you start fixing some of the stuff that they didn't like on the previous one and fixing the bugs, etc. The last phase is testing and possible integration. The testing is done throughout the process after each sprint, but right at the end, we have to do something called a final test or run through or smoke test of the entire system. We also do something called user acceptance testing, whereby we actually give a small group of users the ability to use the system, give feedback, and see how it will work in a real live environment. It's one thing developing, it's almost like in vitro versus in vivo. Something that's shown to work in vitro might not always work in vivo, and it's the same kind of thing. We have to show that the software will work in a real life environment, in an environment where medical students are going through different clinical rotations. We need to understand the infrastructure, the landscape, where there are connectivity problems, etc., like that. And then we can also scope out, are there any integration requirements into the client's backend system? So maybe there's a system that does student management, or that you have existing software solutions, and how we could integrate into them. Deployment should never be step 5, should never be underestimated. And deployment goes around things like training, support, maintenance, making sure that everybody knows how to use the system and that it's working in their environment. And then in an ongoing process, there's maintenance. So in other words, there's always going to be infrastructure changes. Software never stands still. Frameworks change, methodologies change, and you need to keep upgrading those things from time to time. And then you go back around in the circle. So once you've done maintenance, you say, for example, there's an additional module that you need to have developed, you go back into the planning and analysis phase. Now, this would be very traditionally for a product that's brand new, but it also applies to existing products where you want to add additional functionality or extra modules. Hopefully with our system, it should cater for the majority of your requirements, but this is for, in case it doesn't, we would do that gap analysis and then work it out. So on the deployment side, normally what it would work is we have to gather the content, do the analysis and design, then do the development as we spoke about, testing and quality assurance, and then essentially go live. And then that involves support and training and maintenance. This is an example of some of the online training sessions that we're doing for the colleges of medicine now, whereby we're onboarding all of the trainees, supervisors, and HODs onto the system. And you can never underestimate this part of the software development lifecycle, which is the people behind the software. Software can never exist in a vacuum. There always has to be support for the people who are going to be using it. So what is our approach for workplace-based assessments? is we already have a form tool, which is almost like a fully fledged SurveyMonkey type tool, which allows you to create customizable clinical databases. And that's in use actively in our clinical software on our practice application. We're then going to leverage that on our existing Logbox academic platform because we have all the roles and access rights already. We have a role for a trainee, a supervisor, an HOD, for an organization like the CMSA or for a university, etc. And the nice thing about that form tool is that it's customizable and flexible. It's got branching logic. There's a lot of survey type functionality already in that survey tool. We've already used that for clinical databases. But the nice thing is it's not a form tool like you could argue, well, why don't you just use SurveyMonkey or Google Forms? It's integrated into a workflow and you can get audit and statistics. It's not just a static form. And from that, you can create dashboards with live feedback and draw stats and analytics. And as I said, we'd also incorporate the digital identity management to just confirm the identity of people interacting with the system. So this is just to show you the process, and then I'm going to actually show you just a live demo. This was some of the wireframes. These are low fidelity wireframes that were created for pediatrics in the colleges of medicine. And this was for a new assessment type tool. So you can see these are some of the wireframes. And then this is a dashboard that you could use to show, get an overview of all of your candidates, your undergraduate candidates across the university. But obviously, this would only be at an executive level that would only be exposed from that point of view. And then this is just a page to show you the customizable form tool. And then I'm going to run into an online demo. Maybe before I go into the online demo, maybe we can just stop and take a few questions, and then we can go into the online demonstration.
Hi, Neil. There's a few questions that have come through. I think a lot of questions around whether the app was free or not. Then there's some technical question. First question, another question is that is a software for medicine, allied health and dentistry only? Is the Logbox academic module an app? Why is it an app? Does the mobile app cover the whole health science discipline? So I think there are people from outside of medicine who are in the webinar as well.
So those are all great questions. I think the point is when we developed this system, it was specifically for the colleges of medicine, but it is a platform. In other words, it's very easy to change the labels in the database to accommodate any type of workplace-based assessments or e-portfolio. And I see Vasuchetti has explained, yes, the SDLC has been building a new system, and I did then going to say that the system exists and we need to do a gap analysis. And obviously we would need to do that, the functional and non-functional specs in order to cater for that. So it is slightly different, and that's where the gap analysis is important. So say, for example, if you do have things outside of health sciences, could it be catered for? Absolutely. It obviously would need some customization, but traditionally this has been for the healthcare environment because the content has predominantly been healthcare, but no reason why we can't do it, for other platforms. I think I'm just looking here. The questions have disappeared. I don't know if I catered for all of them. The other thing was whether or not the app was free. So currently, we started off, Logbox Academic is free. It's going to be free for particular members of an organization. So for example, it would be free. It's free for members of the colleges of medicine, but that's an arrangement that then we have with the CMSA. So what would probably be here is regarding I don't want to necessarily get into how we would do the contract with UKZN, but essentially that's up to them. The license fee can be done at an organizational level, and then you could decide if you want it to be free or not free for the candidates. So, but I think that's beyond the scope of today's meeting. I don't know, Prof. Nadia, if you want to get into that now, or if that's a follow-up discussion.
Yeah, I think we can probably get into that afterwards. Okay. There's a few other questions. Where's the data stored?
So the data is stored currently locally in South Africa on AWS, but in the South African sub-region. So it's stored as a cloud-based system, and it's it is based in, so from a Poppy point of view, it's stored on AWS, but in the Cape Town branch of AWS, if that makes sense.
Are there processes that can develop into a portfolio of learning, i.e. reflective processes rather than a portfolio of activity?
Yes, absolutely. So we have that, and when I get into the live demo, we'll show you how that translates. It probably could be enhanced, but again, that's where the form tool comes in. Okay, the next question I see there is, the app covers all health sciences. Why HPCSN practice numbers if you do not have these hiders one? Okay, so it's for health sciences. The practice number is not mandatory, only the HPCSA number. Now, again, we developed the system for postgraduate training, and in those situations, they do have HPCSA numbers. The system has not been customized yet for undergrads. So we would have to customize it, and we would obviously take out the need for an HPCSA number for undergraduates.
Can we redirect storage to on-premises or to OneDrive?
This question always gets asked. I think the truth is you'd have to ask what's the necessity of that. By creating a static database, it always creates problems with synchronicity of the data. So you could have a local version of it and run through a VPN if you really want to, but the modern methodology of doing this is through cloud-based, and obviously with the benefits of that, all the security that comes with it, et cetera, et cetera. What we can do is we can create a replica of the database on AWS from a redundancy point. I mean, from a if there's ever any issue, they could always have a replication of the database, so that there's backups, and we make daily backups on a daily basis. So every 24 hours there's a backup that's made. So all of those things we have to cater for. So I mean, I don't know if I can open that up to the audience, is to say what would be the specific reason for that. I understand, if you're worried about security and connectivity and all of those kind of things, but it takes away the benefit of having it being cloud-based, essentially. So unless that's an absolute requirement, I would suggest against it. But if it is an absolute requirement and it's policy for the university, that can be done technically from that point of view.
Okay, so there's just a comment here. It would be definitely helpful for undergrad graduates in terms of logbooks. Jackie van Wyk, who owns the data generated and how will open access issues be managed?
Okay, so the way that this works is that the IP of the system obviously belongs to the company, but then the raw data is for the client. So essentially that is, well, I mean, if you look at data ownership, number one, the person who's inputted the data owns their own data. And then because they're affiliated to a particular university, the university will own the data. And there is no open access issue. So, I mean, essentially it's all managed through user logins. And again, we can, create one-time PINs, et cetera, like that. So you can have two-factor authentication, from that point of view. So, there'll be different roles. There are different roles and access rights. So only certain people will be able to see the overview or all of the statistics. The trainee can obviously only see their information, and then you go up the ladder. I don't know if that answers the question.
We can probably open some of the questions out in towards the end. Can the app be used as a bedside tool for formative assessment and immediate feedback?
Yes, and I'm going to show that in the demo. That is the new thing that we've just created.
Okay, so I think we'll stop there and we'll allow you to continue with the presentation now.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. So I'm going to basically go to an online demo now. So I'm going to just stop sharing, and then I will share another screen. If you give me a sec. Okay, so can everyone see my screen at the moment?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So it's just logged me out because I think I was idle there for a sec. So let me just move this for a second. Give me a sec. It's logged me out all over the place, which is not a bad thing. I just need to move this control bar. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to log into the system. I'm logging into our live system currently. And this is basically my academic one. Okay, this is the web portal. There's obviously a mobile app as well. It'll be a little bit difficult to demonstrate that on the system unless I sign in with my phone. But I think majority of the functionality you'll be able to see from the screen. So this is the home screen, and on the home screen, again, you've got a power search across any procedure. You can add procedures, print out consent forms. If you've got any guideline documents that you want your candidates to read and go through, you can put it in here. And there you can, obviously upload any existing documents related to a logbook. Here's some statistics, last procedure, last incomplete, last viewed, and then some further statistics. So I'll just run through the logbook aspect, and then I'm going to quickly move into rotations, the training history, and then the formative assessments I'm going to show you on our QA system. So here's the logbook, and obviously from there you can just go and add a procedure. I'm going to move this out of the way. And here it's, again, one question that's going to come up is, why are we putting identifiable patient information in? I'm going to preempt that question. You don't have to. You put in as much or as little as you want. When we did this for the colleges of medicine, there was a problem with fraud, and they wanted to be able to almost go back and verify that the procedures were linked back to patients. But again, we can remove the identifiable patient information if you want to. Everything that gets put in is immediately de-identified, and in order to de-identify it, you need to submit a one-time PIN that's sent from your cell phone. So here you can essentially put in some patient details. And obviously, if you put in the ID number now, it auto-populates the rest system, the age, gender, date of birth. And again, nothing is mandatory on purpose because it's meant to just be a note-keeping tool for your logbook. But obviously, we can make some of the fields to be validated. At any stage, you can save and continue later. Otherwise, you can go there. Now, you would choose one of your hospitals. So I'm trying to remember some of your hospitals down in Durban there. What would be your academic hospital your big one down there?
King Edward VIII.
King Edward, there we go. Okay, so King Edward, there we go. And as soon as you've entered that, it will come up in like a favorites list, so you don't have to search again. It will be under recent hospitals, and then there's a full list, so you can navigate your way through public and private. And it caters for majority of hospitals in South Africa. Gives you the option to put in a hospital number if you want to. Again, a lot of these fields might not be relevant from an undergrad point of view. We can always hide them. And then it's the procedure type. Now, what we've done is we've created vernacular descriptions for procedures. We purposely haven't used RPL codes or CPT codes. In future, we might be going towards CPT codes just purely because it's more easy from a statistical point of view. However, particularly for undergrads, the procedures might be easier to comprehend if it's just in simple language, simple vernacular. So here, for example, I can type in, FEMA, and then it comes up as it gets prompted, and I can put in the name of the procedure. I've also got recent procedures. I've got a full list that I can navigate through with a tree. I can go through that. I can say that's lower limb. And all of this is content that can be inputted into the system. So this is just a platform. Whatever your procedure would be for the particular trainee going through a particular rotation, you can then enter it in. And then if you can't find what you're looking for, you can enter a custom procedure name. If there was a complication, you can enter it there. And you click next. Here it asks you some information on where you did the procedure. And there again, you would say, what was your role? Now, obviously, as medical students, they might just be observers or they might be an assistant. Depends on what level of training they're in. So if it's observer, you can say, were you scrubbed or unscrubbed, for example. And this is obviously very surgically based. You have different templates for anesthesia, different templates for psychiatry, pediatrics, internal medicine, et cetera, And then you can associate attachments. You can put in who are the colleagues who were supervising you. You can add comments. And then essentially what it does then is it links it back to a rotation. And this rotation is pre-configured. So in other words, the university or the HOD of a particular department would say, these are the particular clinical rotations that the trainee would need to go through. So here you can see a trauma A firm, for example, or spine or pediatrics, or et cetera. You'd say save. And then you can see here, it goes in patient identifiable information is de-identified. If you want to identify it, you say yes. I would then get a one-time PIN sent to my phone, and I could put in that one-time PIN and open up that record. You can also do a search from a date range and do procedures from a certain time. You can create reports either in Excel or PDF, and then you can create filters. So you've got a power search over here that you can search across the whole screen, but you can also filter it according to location, hospital role, exclude emergency procedures, apply the filters, and then get the logbook report. The other thing that you can do is view a consolidation sheet whereby you can have a record of an aggregated sheet. So it can show you how many procedures you've done in a particular hospital, a particular type of procedure, et cetera, et cetera. So that's very logbook based. And that's the fundamentals of the logbook system. The next thing is to go into the rotation screen, which is linked to the rotations, linked to the logbook. Essentially what happens there is that you would specify as an organization what are the rotations that different trainees need to rotate through. And then the trainee can go and say, right, they want to request sign off. And what then happens is they say what year of study they're in. So obviously here, they could say they're year 3. Obviously this is related to postgraduate registrar training. And you'd say, right, I started on, 1st of January. I ended on today, and I say next. And then here you can say, well, what were your learning objectives? In other words, what did you want to obtain from this? And we can build this out into more. So we can create customized questions. We can have forms. We can allow you to upload attachments. So that is where, this is reflective learning concept, so that you can put in some information there, and then you can type in your reflection. And this is, again, customizable. We've got, for different specialties, we've got different types of these rotation assessment forms. And then you go to the next one, and then you need to basically choose a supervisor or your mentor. And so here you would choose this person. If they're not on the system, you can invite them to join. But once that person gets the request to join, they have to be accredited by either a HOD or the organization. So you don't want to have a situation where people are signing off trainees, like the trainees get their friends to sign off themselves. You've got to make sure that accredited people are actually signing them off. So then what happens is that you request sign off. Okay. And then basically that changes the screen, and you can see now that the request has been sent to that person on this date and that time. You can cancel it or you can view it. And then then there'd be a supervisor view. They would then see this request. They would then be able to view the rotation, the training history, the logbook, and they can see what the person's done as well as their learning objectives and reflection. And then they can assess the person and do a almost like a rating assessment. So they could say, well, on these 5 areas they did really well. This needs for improvement. I'd have to log into the system as a supervisor in order to show you that. But essentially all of that functionality is available. The last step obviously is at the end of training, is that somebody can request HOD sign off. And this would be at the end of, let's say, undergraduate training, or the end of each year, you could submit a final request whereby it allows now let's say the head of department or the head of your training program to see all the rotations and all the comments and all the assessments that have been done in an aggregated way, and then essentially say, right, this person signed off to continue to the next year or to have their exam, etc., etc. The next feature I want to show you is the training history. Again, this is customizable. So this is more for a postgraduate, and this can be customized for anything essentially. So what it does is obviously just the trainees' demographic information. And then it gives you almost like a barometer to show you how much that you need, how much you've done and how much you still need to complete. And then it just gives you a list of everything that you need to. And here you can add you can just jump to specific sections. These are all of these headings are customizable. You can do them on the back and then change the content. But what it allows you to do is to add in things, for example, that would say, your undergraduate medical qualifications or any courses, congresses, etc. Where have you done your internship, comp service? Again, this wouldn't apply to undergrads, but we could potentially, you give us the content and we can, put this on the platform. Yeah, you can put in any certificates that the person's, done. You can put in a course, which institution, upload an attachment like a certificate, for example. And again, lectures, meeting, workshops, seminars. So for example, if they're attending certain lectures, they can record them here. If they're attending certain clinical workshops, etc., whatever you want to put in here. As the trainee goes through all of these things, they can literally log whatever they want to do. This is around reading and research. So that could be any training that they've done, any papers that they've read, any papers that they've written, any of that kind of stuff. And then this is around MMed, the MMed training. Again, this is for postgraduate training, but if the guys are involved in any type of research, it allows them to just track, the whole process of submitting their MMed. And yeah, this is customizable, so we can change this. There, obviously, you can export it as a PDF or as an Excel. And then the next page is just your attachment screen. So there's the PDF, sorry, just close that off. Next page is your attachment screen. So if you've taken any photos or images, etc., this is nice for the trainee. If they've got like an interesting clinical scenario or something like that, it can be viewed from there. The nice thing is all of this is protected behind passwords and PIN codes and one-time PINs, etc. So you shouldn't have the wrong people looking at this information. So that's the current portfolio system. I'm now just going to navigate through to the new system, which is on QA. And I'm just going to log in as and I need to just get the credentials quickly. If you can give me a second. So this is our QA environment. So this is where we do our quality assurance and testing. So this isn't live yet. It's going to be made live very, very soon. And this is a screen that an HOD would see now. And I don't know if you see at the top of the screen, there's something called HOD activities. So here they can approve supervisors, they can approve portfolios, which would be the final sign-off, and they can manage rotations and add different rotations for their organization, etc. And then this is the new feature. This is called assessments. And this is where now you can do your summative and formative assessments from. It's a platform. So you would put the content in, you would tell us what content you want. Essentially, what it allows you to do is to add any type of template. So if I add this template, if I can just check, can you guys see the screen on the screen now that says create a survey?
We see it as a black box at the moment. So
as a black box. Okay. So let me just share.
It's not coming through very clearly.
Okay, let me just share again.
Not too sure if it's a signal issue.
Can you see that now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, so it says create survey at the top.
Yes, we see that.
Okay. So maybe you could just give me an example, somebody from the audience or Prof. Naidu, maybe yourself, if you could give me an example of one of the EPAs or one of the summative and formative assessments you'd like to do on one of your candidates. Very basic, and I'll just show you how we build it out.
So one would be take a history from a patient with a cardiovascular problem.
Okay, so I then say create. All right, and what would be the first requirement or first thing that you'd want the candidate to do? Obviously, developing a patient rapport. Okay, and do you want to say, is that like a yes, no answer, or do they have a scale or something like that? Or is it just normally a scale. Okay, so if you had a scale, we could have a grid, or we could have a drop down or a multiple select. So if you have a single select, we could say, did the trainee, and obviously, I mean, this is completely customizable, develop a rapport with the patient. Or how well, should we say? Yes. Okay, and then you can add an option, and you can say poor, I don't know, good. You can put in whatever you want, basically, and excellent. Now, what this can do is, obviously, you would then be presented this. This is what we call the form builder tool. So now we're building and creating the template. You can also give a scoring to it. So you could score it like, say, out of 10 or whatever, that's a number 4, or, rate the questions, and then we can draw analytics from that at the end. The other thing that we can do is we can make it a default type question. So we can say, well, this is something that the person has to answer, yes or no. And the other thing that we can do is we can have branching logic. So say, for example, you've indicated poor. We can say this is a follow-up question or a follow-up page. And then we can just say, well, why, or list the reasons, list reasons why, so that it's more explanatory. You haven't just said, well, they're very poor, but you can actually say, and then we can have different types of question answers, short, long, multiple, select, single, select, drop down. So here it would be a long question, and the person could actually then quantify the reasons why, they didn't do it. Maybe just one more question, Prof. Naidoo, and then I'll stop there. Or what other, question type would you want to accommodate?
So he needs to establish the presenting complaints.
Okay. All right. So again, these are all requirements. And essentially you could say, did they establish the presenting complaint? And it would be a yes, no. So the different question types that we can cater for is a short question, long question type, multiple select, where you can select multiple check boxes. And the nice thing about that is, so if, say, for example, it's just an example of how well did the candidate, establish the main complaints or presenting complaints. Okay, you'd give us the content in Word format or Excel, whatever, and we would customize it for you. So you could say there, poor, whatever you want to do, excellent. But you can also cater for the option of other, so for example, and other allows you to just enter free text there. So it's a full customizable clinical, database tool. The other thing that you can do is that you can have the drop-down type question. We can also do something called the data source. So the way that this works is if, say, for example, you have a data source that you want to import of on a spreadsheet, which we can search against, then you can import that spreadsheet in and the system can search across that database. There's also something called the context source. So, for example, if you have existing information linked to that particular trainee, et cetera, you can suck that information in. We also have a date picker, which is very obvious. It just indicates, what's the current date, and the person can select it from a calendar. So let's just say, let me just delete some of these. Okay, but I'm just showing you examples. I'll actually show you another one that we've done. And then there's an information block. So, for example, if you want to give the trainee or the supervisor or whoever a preamble or explain to them what's actually they have to do, you could just put in text, which is an explanation box. And then there's a signature tool. So you can get the trainee to actually sign on their device, on their mobile device, or on a laptop or desktop, etc., iPad, etc. And that can allow for immediate feedback. So, for example, the trainee can sign, submit it, and then the supervisor can see that form and see the answers, and then they can sign, and then the two-way feedback is actually done. There's also different types of grid type questions, creating columns, etc. But I think everybody gets the concept there. If you click done, it will publish, it will create a draft. If you click publish, it will make it available to be used. So I'm just going to say done. And what you'll see now is that it's basically going to have a draft there that's been created. And then, taking history from the cardiovascular patient, that's in draft mode. If I edit it and I publish it, it then becomes available. So there's a particular template that's been published here called performance evaluation target. There's another one here called formative and summative assessment. This is particularly for pediatrics. So now this is the creation screen where the HOD is busy creating it. Now what I'll do is I'm going to go to log in as if I'm a trainee. So let me just log in quickly as a trainee. Okay, just give me a few seconds, please. Again, this is all dummy data that's going in there. There's no live information. Okay, I can then log in. All right, so now you'll see this is new. It's different from the previous one that I had, and that is essentially that there's an assessment page. And this is the trainees page now. Everything that you're seeing will be made available in a mobile app as well. It hasn't been developed, but it is going to be developed in the next 2 weeks. And essentially what it will do is it will say to you, all right, what's available and what's completed. Okay, so those are all your completed ones, and you can see that one's been submitted, that one's been approved, the date and time that those two actions have occurred. So here's an available assessment, and I need to now as a trainee complete this one. Can everybody see the box that's opened up? It says performance evaluation target. Yes. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so again, so I can say that, and then here's a rating there. This is just an example of how it can work. Okay, and then history taking and examination, clinical ability, excellent, average, poor, just to give you an example, diagnostic competence, and then you can add another row to that, etc., etc. And these are we're just using this as examples to show you how the system would work. And then you could say submit, and then you can see now that you would then choose a supervisor to do your collaboration with, or to have the summative assessment or formative assessment with. So you tick that, you say submit, and then obviously that will then get sent to the supervisor. So that's the trainee side. The template was created by the organization, or in this case, the HOD. The trainee is now filled up, and you can have a whole number of these assessments that you can do. You can search across it as well, and you can view the ones that you've completed already. Then I'm going to sign in lastly as a supervisor, or in this case would be a mentor, or whoever's doing the academic training. So let me just sign up. No, not sign up, sorry, log in. Okay. Just give me a second. Okay, so if you see here now, there's rotation approval request. That's one of the things, obviously, that needs to be approved. I'll just show you, this is just to go back, that's the rotation approval, not necessarily the assessments. But if I go view, I'll be able to see all the status of a rotation, etc., and be able to sign it off. If I now go to assessment approvals, right? There's the assessment approval. And you can see, I just don't know if this links to the candidate that actually sent it before. Let's just see pending approvals. Let me just check if Kribis is on the line. I don't think it's linking back to the actual supervisor that I chose, but I think you get the idea here. Essentially, they would have a pending approval. They would then click on it. They'd be able to see what the other person has written and then approve it. As I said, this is hot off the press, the system, so it hasn't even gone through our full QA. Yeah, I'd have to link it back to the actual supervisor that I've chosen over there. All right, so let me stop there. I think that gives you a very good idea of what the system can do, what it can't do. I don't think there's anything else I need to run through. The only other thing here is, as a supervisor, you can also have an overview of all of your trainees, do a power search across it, and you can view their portfolios at any stage. There's also what we call a dashboard, which can be viewed at an institutional level, where they can see all of the trainees, all in the institution, but obviously that's with particular rights access. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then you can open it up to the floor.
Okay, there's just a few comments and a few questions. So Prof. Simji says patient identification is essential to confirm data has not been made up or falsified. I think that's what the CMSA is also worried about.
Absolutely.
And he also says, how frequently is information sent to the consultant to assess registrar performance?
So the current system, it's linked to the rotation approval. In other words, at the end of the rotation, it's sent. But now that we've created that assessment module, it's basically ad hoc. In other words, you can do it as it's user driven. So we can create what's called workflow. So we can create a workflow engine that dictates that a particular assessment has to be done at a particular time, and that would come out of the gap analysis. So you would need to tell us how soon you want it, but we can build those business rules in. Right now, the assessments are designed to be ad hoc. In other words, the user, the trainee, goes and says, okay, I have to complete an assessment. They click on the assessment, they complete it, and that's then sent to the supervisor. So there's no strict rules around that yet, but it's easy to implement those rules, if that makes sense.
Okay, Prof. Gady, it looks great to link to a comprehensive procedure list across all the modules. Can the outputs link automatically with Moodle so that an overview of procedures covered in the module can be viewed?
Yeah, so that's the consolidation sheet that I was referring to. So in other words, you're able to aggregate all the information. The other thing is it's stored in the database. So if you give us a particular report structure that you want, we could either put that onto like a Power BI dashboard for you, or we could produce an Excel report with analytics and statistics, etc. So that's all possible.
And then Prof. Mabuza, as a supervisor, I don't want the candidate to amend my assessment. Is there security in this regard?
So yes, so we can make it that the forms are uneditable. In other words, once the assessment's been done, they can't go in and change it. Remember, you're logged in and you're completing the assessment from your side. The trainee will not be able to change what you've written. They enter their portion, you enter your portion, etc. If that makes sense.
Yes, there's different security levels.
Yeah.
Then there's a question, where can we find the app?
So the app's available on the App Store and it's on the website, but I must caution against people who want to just go in and use it. It's only relevant to those people who are in postgraduate training at the moment. So if you go to the App Store, or you go to the Google Play Store, the Logbox academic app is there. Obviously there are 3 apps. There's patient, there's practice. Academic is the gray one. Again, it's designed for postgraduate training, so it might not be relevant. And in order to benefit from this, you need to sign up to a particular institution. However, you can use the app in what we call private. So in other words, as if you were a private practitioner, not linked to an academic institution. You just wouldn't see the rotations because that's particularly linked to an academic institution. But yes, the app's available. It's currently free. And as I say, but the academic side of it is linked to an organization. There's also the website where you just go to www.logbox.co.za, and that's the academic side. You could sign up, but again, you'd be putting in fictitious information if you don't have a HPCSA number, so it's probably not advisable.
And then can the app be used as an OSCE scoring system?
Again, it's a form tool. So, if you want to use it for OSCEs, you can use it. Absolutely. You just put the content in. In other words, it's a platform. You put whatever you want on there. If you want to use it for scoring OSCEs, absolutely. You would just create the content, so that's the part where we have to get all the requirements, get all the content in. If there's anything that can't be catered on that form tool, we can also create customizable questions. So for example, for Donald Gordon Medical Center in Johannesburg, the colorectal unit there had a particular requirement for a colorectal polyps question, and we built that out specifically for them. So using that form tool, we can also build out specific question sets. But majority of the questions can be catered for on the form tool.
I'll ask Marianne to unmute Vasu, because Vasu may have some technical questions, and then also to unmute Bernard, because Bernard is chairing the curricular review and he may have specific questions relating to undergraduate curriculum.
Okay, Vasu is unmuted. Go ahead.
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, Neil. So not too many technical questions. Obviously, I can't comment around the functionality of the system as the medical school. That's their role. So from a system perspective, maybe if you can just touch on some of the administration. So do you have one administrator to the system, or how do you allow for administrator rights? I'm just rattling on. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Sorry, I see I'm on mute. I've just asked one of our engineers to just join in on the call. Then we can actually go into the exact details. But so when you say administrative rights, you're talking about back end from a development perspective, or you're talking about from an organizational perspective?
From an organizational perspective.
So there is currently what we term CMSA access, and that's managed through particularly username, passwords, etc. They have rights to view dashboard information across the whole system. So there is admin rights for people who are basically at the organizational level. Any dashboards or additional analytics that you'd want, or the ability to add rotations, for example, add HODs in the CMSA is all managed through that back-end administrative system. So and we can allow for multiple admin access as needed. Okay. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. You didn't touch on analytics. So if I wanted to get reports out of the system, how would the analytics be? So if I want to, get some sort of feel for the number of students that have, how long they spent on the system, that type of thing. So just the reporting around that. I don't think, did you touch on that?
Yeah, sure. So we do have a dashboard, which is at high level. It shows you the number of candidates in each thing, and you can drill down and then go into particular things. And that would, as I said, would be at like a College of Medicine level. In this case, it would be a university level. Right now, we haven't exposed from an analytics point of view onto like a live dashboard, but any statistics or analytics that you'd want can be drawn directly from the database. Kobus, are you there? Have you joined in? I don't know, he might just still be signing in. He could answer some of these questions for you.
I think that's
just wait for
fine
him to join. But essentially, we've done these, essentially right now it would be a manual process. So if you needed any analytics, we would pull it out manually from the system. Going forward, a very nice way, and I'm sure you guys have used it before, is using Power BI. We've done it for some of our other systems before, is, say which endpoints or which data you want to see. And then essentially we've got the database, we can expose it on a Power BI dashboard for you guys, which is a live dashboard. And you can get, real life statistics and track trends, as Prof. Naidu was saying, the ability to see which candidates are lagging behind and intervene before there's a problem with them. That would be the, even apply some analytics behind that.
Has your guy joined us yet?
Your pardon?
Is he
Also
on?
ask that again, please.
Oh, so yes, my question was around, I was asking if your technical guy has joined in as yet.
I think he hasn't got a link. So Marianne, if you could just send the link to him again, if you don't mind. But I mean, I can try and field some of the questions if you like.
Okay. The other thing was, at the risk of adding another system to UKZN, could be integrated into our LMS. So it feels as if whoever's using the system is using it from our LMS as opposed to actually going on to another system. So
absolutely. I mean, again, this comes down to an executive discussion, is whether or not you'd want the system white labeled. It's possible to do that. So again, we own all the code. We can white label the solution, house it within yours, and we can also cater for single sign-on. So, to make the transition quite smooth, you don't want people having to navigate and use different username and passwords. We're busy implementing single sign-on across all of our products, and we could extend that to your system as well. And white labeling is also possible. It's not a problem at all.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Morgan.
Right, Bernard?
Yeah, thanks. I also had the question about sign-on, that kind of whether it can be easy to have a single sign-on for all the systems, because I think that's where students would struggle with quite a bit. I've got some more of the educational things. So is it possible for the students to can get an overview of all the skills that are expected of them, and so that they could, for instance, in the beginning of a module, really focus what kind of skills they need to learn, and maybe in discussion with the supervisor say, all right, look, you haven't done any LPs up to now. In this block, you need to do at least 5. Let's plan that for you, that kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 ways of doing that. I see Kobus has joined, by the way. So if there are any hardcore technical questions, you're welcome to point them to him. Welcome, Kobus. Thank you for joining. But Bernard, I think on the educational side, yes, I understand what you're after now. I think it's a little bit of a deficiency, which we could definitely cater for, is to kind of like tell the candidates up front what do they need to do. Now, the way that that's done is through I don't know if you remember on the home screen, there was a guideline document. So for the CMSA, what they do is they publish the guidelines, and they actually insist that the candidate reads and accepts them. And we have a section there where you actually accept that you've read the guidelines. However, what we could build in is, almost like more of a guide, at the start of their rotation, that they have to go through a number of steps and et cetera. And it tells them how many of each procedure you can do. Again, this would all come out in the gap analysis for what are the additional requirements that UKZN would need.
The other question I had is about the more formative processes, like whether there's a chat function. So for instance, if somebody does a mini CX or sees a patient or whatever, uploads that, the supervisor looks at it and then kind of says, so what went through your mind when you thought this was cardiac failure? Because the heart is small, there's no edema, and there's no JVP. You know, like that sort of thing, where you can actually engage with the clinical reasoning of the patient, of the student, and kind of give kind of live feedback, even if it's asynchronous, so that there can be a discussion about it. I mean, that's really where kind of a really critical learning process will take place.
So I'm assuming, and maybe I'm not understanding, but I mean, normally, I suppose COVID has changed all of these things, but normally, I mean, when I trained med school quite a few years ago, I mean, you would be doing this with somebody there, or is it, you know, that they're doing the assessment and then, you know, just submitting it, you know, so I'm trying to understand the use case for that. So for example, you obviously want to record that the assessment has taken place. But with regards to the chat functionality, isn't that something that would take place in person, or maybe things have changed from when I did it?
Well, I think it would have to take place in person in many instances. But I think so. I'm really trying to think of how, and for instance, if the students submit 20 patients, so they need to submit it for DP, and I think that's actually another area that would be very easy to manage. It's like to and get all the DP requirements ticked off and signed off. I mean, I can really see how this process would be very easy. But I'm just thinking, when they need to submit patients, is there a possibility to give feedback or to pose questions so that they can resubmit, or that there's some conversation about it? So quite a lot of the clinical supervision obviously kind of takes place in the ward. But for patients, but I think kind of in the more formal submissions, kind of, can we think about a more formative process as well?
It's all possible on the technology platform. We do have like a two-way communication, but it ends there. So in other words, the trainees enter something, the supervisor enters something back. To then expand that into almost like a continuous communication is something that we don't have currently, but again, you know, that is something we could add. Just to note that we are going on this journey with the colleges of medicine around building workplace-based assessment. So there will be a lot of crossover. We're definitely going to use the platform that I've shown you now, and they're getting all of their, you know, assessment forms and everything, and all the content in for all the different specialties. So, and I'm sure some of these things will come up again. So again, we'll come out in the gap analysis, and we could definitely build out that additional functionality if it's needed.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks. Great. Look, I attended some of the College of Medicine presentations as well, so I'm a little bit familiar with it. But I think kind of there are particular things for undergraduates, like where kind of, I think there's less focus on kind of just the procedure, or kind of just the evidence of all the procedures, for instance, especially in the surgical disciplines, than to kind of having that sort of reflective processes that we could build in. And I think that would require more of a conversation.
So I think the form tool, I don't know from what you've seen, that form tool and that process of, you know, trainee submits, supervisor sees, they give feedback, all of that is very customizable. So it's sometimes difficult to see until you put the content in. You know, so if we could get some real life use cases and you could, you know, put it on the system, it would be interesting to see if it fulfills your requirements. But absolutely, I think this was designed at postgraduate level, and we would have to just see, obviously, the benefit of using this is you're not starting from scratch. We just have to see how you'd customize it specifically for undergraduate.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a few questions from the participants. The first one was from Sumaya. You mentioned that the app is POPI compliant. How will patient identifiers be collected and managed?
So again, what happens is the data gets inputted, and then as soon as it gets inputted, it's de-identified. So in other words, you have to, in order to access that, you have to get a one-time PIN. So there's two-factor authentication in order to do it. And remember, that's also hidden behind a username and a password. So, you know, all of the things around POPI is more around consent to getting the information. Now, that is I must be honest, is a deficiency in the current system because of the fact that you should get consent. So what we have on the system is a consent form that you can print out and sign. way we handle this, and obviously that's not a very practical thing in the clinical environment, the way that you'd have to handle this, if you really want to become POPI compliant, is you'd need to make sure that when the patients are admitted into the hospital, they are signing something on admission to say that they're agreeing for their information to be stored for academic purposes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's exactly the same as when you're gathering information for your MDT meetings, for any academic presentations that you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, POPI is a very good system, to protect people's identity, but it's got some pitfalls in medicine because some of the things don't really apply. Like, for example, if you've got an unconscious patient, you can't get hold of the family. How do you get the explicit consent? Now, we've built a really robust system for the private sector around this particular problem. So in this situation, the patient owns the demographic data. They give consent immediately to the practice, and that can be shared with other practices, but it was designed specifically for POPI purposes. In the case of a hospital where you've got patients that have been admitted to the hospital, that's not always practical because they might not have cell phones, they might not have the ability to give consent, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the best solution is really to do it at an institutional level and make sure that from the legal perspective, it's being covered when the patient's admitted. I don't know if there's any further comments on that, but that's from our side. From securing the data once it's in the system, we provide that security, we de-identify the data. But as to getting consent from the patient in order to do it, you've got the same problem with all the other stuff that you do in clinical practice at the moment. I don't know if there's any further comments about that, or it's an interesting point of discussion.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Prashini Davender. If HPCSA and CMSA approve it, then it could be paid for at that level and standardized at the level for internship or registrar training, respectively, rather than individualizing per university.
Yeah, but I think for the HPCSA perspective, it would be for interns. I think you guys are looking at it from an undergrad perspective, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and then all the undergrad programs are different across all the universities as well. So until we reach a point where we have a standardized curriculum across all medical schools, it's not going to be working because each medical school does the training very, very differently.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right. Marianne has posted on multiple occasions the YouTube. So if people want to view this video again, please feel free to do so. You said Corbus is in. You wanted to field a few of the technical questions for him. Please do so now, Neil.
Yes. If there's any, technical questions you want to know about security, infrastructure, architecture, we've got Corbus Saturday on the line. He's the Chief Technical Officer, and he's basically, his team has been responsible at EPUs for developing the application. So yeah, if anybody's got any other technical questions, you're welcome to ask them now.
Vasud, is there any question that you feel is unanswered yet?
I'm good, thanks, Megan. The infrastructure guys, I'm not sure if any of them are on this call. I did send the invite to them, but they really look at security and infrastructure and that type of thing. But I think, if it's based in the cloud, and if there's an option for us to bring it in-house, those are all possible options. I think I'm comfortable. Thanks.
Maybe I could ask a question, and I don't know if there are people on the call, so maybe you could answer it, is what are the requirements from UKZN from a security perspective? Do you have firewalls that you need everything to operate behind? How are normally your systems deployed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're still pretty old school. We like to keep everything in-house. We own all our infrastructure, all our cloud support. We very recently moved onto the cloud for email, for student and staff only. That's pretty much the only thing that we have as cloud services. So everything sits behind a firewall. We have a security person in-house that manages all of that. So I think from a security perspective, I think that's how we like to keep things. Thanks.
Okay, Corbus, I think one of the questions was also around them being able to host the application locally. I was trying to go through the benefits of rather hosting it with, in the cloud-based solution, all the stuff that goes around with that. But maybe if you want to just elaborate a little bit more around the benefits of being with, cloud-based service like AWS.
Thanks, Neil. I'm in a public space, so please excuse the background noise. Yes, so we hosted with AWS, and our application is from that point of view cloud native, so that we're able to follow the well-architected principles of minimal access rights, minimal permissions. We've got proper security measures in place. The system is, from that point of view, hosted in a private subnet with only the accessible web services accessible from the public internet. So I think the benefits from our point of view is because everyone is these days working remotely and accessing systems remotely, you would need some access control within your firewalls locally to be able to access the system from remote locations. And that from that point of view, it doesn't really matter whether you're on premise or in the cloud. Making those systems accessible from via remote locations is basically creates the same kind of risks for on-premise systems as it does for systems in the cloud.
Okay, thank you. There's just a comment from Anonymous. It says, perhaps for POPI compliance, UKZN could utilize the hospital numbers, initials, and demographics, but not full patient names, even if there is de-identification available. So cybercrime in the medical sector is rife at present. Mostly during our presentations on ward rounds, we use patients' initials for confidentiality.
So Neil, maybe I can comment on that. Our system allows for patient details such as name and surname. We have, from the data we have at the moment, we can see that many of the registrars prefer just putting in minimal information, such as just initials. But however, so the system does de-identify the information after entry, so that the procedures or the logbook procedures are not identifiable by default. There is a two-factor authentication process that needs to be completed in order to access the data or de-anonymize the data.
Thanks, Kobus. That's great. And we did run through that before, so that's great to just reiterate it. Remember, the fields are not validated. So if somebody wants to just put initials and a hospital number, that's also perfectly adequate. You just need to be able to, again, once make sure that the students aren't just putting in random information there, and it links back to something that's unique.
So I think one of the students asks, so what's the next step? So I think this webinar was hosted by under the ambit of the MBCHB curriculum or the coordinating committee, and the idea behind this was to expose the academics and the managers to the offerings that were out there, because we wanted to look at obviously recurriculation, but also to look at integration, and the e-portfolio is an ideal way to actually deal with integration, especially across the clinical discipline. So Prof. Bernard Gady is tasked to actually drive this process, and maybe you could consider this as one of the options available when we discuss the recurriculation of the MBCHB program at UKZN. Bernard, I'm not sure if you want to say anything about that.
I think we really need to engage with all the disciplines around that and understand this much deeper. And I agree, like this can be an incredibly powerful integrating tool that's kind of at the beginning of each rotation. You can see what students have done before, where the gaps are, and you can really focus and the students, and also really empower the students of what they need to focus on. So I think I certainly think that something like an e-portfolio that cuts across all the modules would be a very powerful tool for that integration. And also both the horizontal integration across the different disciplines, as well as the longitudinal integration to see, to get a real sense of how you are growing and over time. And I think from a learning perspective, both of those would be really important.
Yes, great. Neil, can I ask you to have some final words?
Yes, thanks everyone. Really appreciate your time. I know it's often difficult to listen to somebody ramble on for an hour and a half. So thank you for all of you for your attention. And I think some very insightful comments and questions have come out. Yes, so we're interested in taking the next steps with you guys. I think if we're ready to engage and work out what are the next steps. Thanks everyone. I don't know if there was anything else that we needed.
Okay, thank you everybody for attending. Thanks to Neil Goldstein from Logbox and Quibus for making themselves available to entertain this webinar. And I hope people gained a little bit of insight into e-portfolios and how it can be used in medical education and certain health professions education, I think, going forward. Thank you everybody for joining and for your attention. Okay, bye-bye.